Let us continue in the book of prayer, level 3. And we have reached the saying of the author here, digression, supplication while standing. Yani, supplication while in the rising position. Standing, if you want to consider normal situation. Rising from bowing, if you want to say broader words, that would include the case of someone who was sitting. The supplication said in this position is what we want to talk about now, including qunut, dua al-qunut. It is not recommended to stand erect, yani to rise up after bowing and to stay in that position longer for the duration of whatever was narrated from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam to stay in that position. This means this position of rising from bowing is a short position. You don't stay there as long as you want. Like when you bow, you can stay bowing as long as you want. And you can stay prostrating as long as you want. But rising up after bowing, you should only say that, you should only stay there as long as, not longer than the time it takes to recite all of whatever came from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam for that position. That includes, what is said in that position includes saying رَبَّنَا لَكَ الْحَمْدُ or رَبَّنَا وَلَكَ الْحَمْدُ. You can say it with the wow or without the wow. رَبَّنَا لَكَ الْحَمْدُ or رَبَّنَا وَلَكَ الْحَمْدُ. This means, when we say this is what you say in the position of rising from bowing, we mean here while you're actually up, not going up, but you have completed going up and now you are up. So if we want to go back to standing as per the usual case, then it means we're not talking about that you are rising from bowing. We're talking about you're actually now standing. You finished rising and you are standing and you have not gone down to sujood. So in that position, you will say as a recommendation, رَبَّنَا لَكَ الْحَمْدُ or رَبَّنَا وَلَكَ الْحَمْدُ. As for the rising itself, you're going to say سَمِعَ اللَّهُ لِمَنْ حَمِدَهُ. We talked about that last time. So while you're in the bowing position, you're going to say Subhana Rabbiyal Azim. And then while you're rising, starting to move, you're going to start saying, when you start moving, Sami'a. Sami'a Allahu liman hamida. So the time it takes you to say that sentence, Sami'a Allahu liman hamida, that time from beginning to end is the time that you're going to take to rise from bowing, to start your rising from bowing and complete it. You will start rising from bowing by the time you start saying Samia, and you will finish rising from bowing by the time you finish saying Hamida. Hamida. So when you're saying that last that's your back erect. Sami'a Allahu liman hamida, with your hands raised. Now, once you're in that position of being up, you say Rabbana lakal hamd or Rabbana walakal hamd. So that's one thing you're going to say in this short position, this position in which you should not say more than what came from the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wasallam in that position. And also, there's more that can go here. Rabbana walakal hamd, including saying hamdan kathiran tayyiban mubarakan fih. And what else is included in what is said in this position, that you shouldn't stand or stay there in that position longer than the time to say what came for that position? The Qunut, Dua Al-Qunut, yani, according to the details we're going to mention now. Linguistically, Qunut means supplication. The Qanitin are the obedient worshippers. Religiously, the Qunut, that's with a ta, not a ta, not Qunut, that's a different word. Qunut, religiously, is a specific supplication. Al-Basir adds, in a specific spot, a specific supplication in a specific spot, and after the formulae of rising. Yani, Dua al-Qunut is a specific supplication, the one we're going to review now, insha'Allah ta'ala, said in a specific spot, which is the spot we're discussing now, and after the formulae of rising, some of which is ربنا ولك الحمد حمدا كثيرا طيبا مباركا فيه. And after finishing that, you say Dua al-Qunut. Though the Imam who's leading the prayer should not say more than ربنا لك الحمد, meaning you say Dua al-Qunut after the formulae. Formulae means the wordings. So formulae, that's plural of formula. What's meant by formula here is some arrangement of words, some combination of words. So all the different formulae of rising, you say all of them if you want. If you want to say everything that goes in that spot, say everything, and then say Dua al-Qunut. But the Imam should not say more than Rabbana lakal hamd. This Imam who has people behind him, then he should not say all the formulae and then say Dua al-Qunut too. Or if you're praying alone, you can do as much as you want to do. As the author of Al-Matlab said, what is accurate is that Dua al-Qunut is valid by even one verse containing supplication. Yani, there's ayahs of the Quran, they have dua in them, right? Yes. ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد إذ هديتنا وهب لنا من لدنك رحمة إنك أنت الوهاب. That's an ayah that has dua, and many ayahs of the Quran have dua. What's accurate is that Dua ul-Qunut is valid by even one verse containing supplication, meaning a supplication from an ayah of the Quran, or even a supplication not narrated from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam with the intent of qunut. Yani, for example, you were praying and you came up from ruku' and you said Rabbana lakal hamd, then you might say Allahumma ghfirli, oh Allah forgive me, with the intention of dua al-Qunut or something else. Like you might say Allahumma barik li, oh Allah bless me in Arabic, or something else. But the best is the specific formula that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam taught Al-Hasan rahimahullah ta'ala. اللهم اهدني فيمن هديت وعافني فيمن عافيت وتولني فيمن توليت وبارك لي فيما أعطيت وقني شر ما قضيت فإنك تقضي ولا يقضى عليك وإنه لا يذل من واليت تباركت ربنا وتعاليت. And that's for the one who's praying alone. All of what we recited is for the one who's praying alone. As for the one who's leading the prayer, then he would change it. He would say, Allahumma ahdina fi man hadayt وعافنا في من عافيت وتولنا في من توليت وبارك لنا فيما أعطيت وقنا شر ما قضيت فإنك تقضي ولا يقضى عليك وإنه لا يذل من واليت تباركت ربنا وتعاليت. So you're going to say this dua in that position that we talked about. The scholars have mentioned additions to and variances in this supplication. Like you saw, as I was preparing this right now, I omitted a sentence because I just want to present here what was presented here, even though there's more sentences that can be added here. But I'm not going to add those sentences. Rather, I'm going to read this sentence to you that the scholars have mentioned additions to and variances in this supplication. It is performed after rising, so not while rising, after rising, and before prostrating. Because the narrators of this detail of performing this supplication in this position are more numerous and stronger memorizers than what was authenticated about the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Notice the word authenticated. Than what was authenticated about the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam doing qunut before bowing. Before bowing. Meaning there is some conflict in the references. Did he do it before bowing or did he do it after rising from bowing? Doing it before bowing was authenticated about the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as well as doing it after rising from bowing. So why are we choosing this one? Because the narrators of this detail are more numerous and stronger memorizers than what was authenticated about the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam doing qunut before bowing. So, according to that, advancing this supplication ahead of bowing does not count. And then, if you were to do that, it would be patched by prostration of forgetfulness, since doing that supplication before bowing is an act of prayer put out of place. Sheikh Samir and Al-Basir mentioned 3 occasions for this supplication. Who's Al-Basir? If you remember, he's one of the explainers of Abu Shuja', whose book I use to contribute to what I'm reading to you now. Because what I'm reading to you now is a compilation of explanations of the text of Abu Shuja', including 2 explanations by Sheikh Samir. Sheikh Samir taught us Abu Shuja' many years ago, when that was the introduction of many of us to Abu Shuja', our first introduction to him in the first place. And then Sheikh Samir, he did an update for the explanation of Al-Ghazi for Abu Shuja'. So both of those explanations of Abu Shuja', of Sheikh Samir for Abu Shuja', I use them for this book I'm compiling here, as well as Al-Basir's explanation for Abu Shuja' and other explanations for Abu Shuja'. And then, as I told you before, I didn't just follow the sequence of Abu Shuja' though here. So this book has its own sequence. So Sheikh Samir and Al-Basir, both of whom who explained Abu Shuja', mentioned 3 occasions for this supplication. 1, In the last rakat of dawn prayer, absolutely. Yani, normally, something you can do every day for no special cause. In the Shafi'i school, you should be doing the dua al-Qunut every day when you pray Fajr prayer in the position we talked about, in the second rak'at. After you finish rising from bowing, before you go down to sujood, right there is where you insert this dua. Ahmed and others narrated that Anas said, the Messenger of Allah never ceased to do Qunut until he departed this world. So he did it every day, consistently. Alayhi salatu wassalam. So those of you who have not yet memorized this dua al-Qunut, what are you waiting for? Unless you still didn't like perfect your Fatiha and your tashahhud, so that's your excuse for not having taken the time and effort to incorporate dua al-Qunut into your prayer. Yani memorize it and have it in your heart for the rest of your life until you die, and then take it to your grave. So if you don't have that excuse, then if you haven't, then this is your next homework. Then dua al-Qunut, memorize it. You said, is this a shorter version of the book of the basics of Muslims prayer of dua al-Qunut? I don't remember what they put in there, but this amount that is presented here is in a hadith, and the scholars have added sentences. So what's here is without anything added from the scholars. Ameen wa fikum. So that's one instance in which you should say this supplication. In the last rakat of the dawn prayer, absolutely, yani, all the time, with no restriction, for no special reason. Yani, there's no reason you should not do it normally. The second time is in the witr prayer, but not absolutely, rather in the second half of Ramadan, as narrated by At-Tirmidhi from Ali, and narrated by Abu Dawood from Ubay ibn Ka'b, and narrated by the four plus Al-Hakim from Al-Hasan, as already presented. Yani, we already presented what was narrated from Al-Hasan, right? Didn't we say that right here? The best is the specific formula that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam taught to Al-Hasan. So this one that the Prophet taught to Al-Hasan, what's the case of this one? The case of this one is that this hadith, the one from Al-Hasan, is about doing Qunut in the witr prayer in the second half of Ramadan. This hadith about Al-Hasan is not about the Fajr prayer, but we're still using it for the Fajr prayer. Performing Qunut in other than the last half of Ramadan, as well as leaving it out at that time, is disliked. Performing Qunut in other than the last half of Ramadan, we're talking about witr prayer, in other than the last half of Ramadan, as well as leaving it out at that time, is disliked and patched by prostration or forgetfulness. But this patching, yani doing sujudu sahu, for not doing this dua of Qunut in witr prayer, that's for sure. Here, leaving it out, doing sujudu sahu for leaving it out, that's for sure. But the sequence of the sentence also includes to say, do sujudu sahu if you perform dua al-Qunut in other than the last half of Ramadan. That part right there, we'll double check it. We'll ask there so as to make sure we don't take misunderstanding there. Yani, if I put all my information together properly, then this is fine. And I did review before the lesson, but I didn't look back into my book to check my translation sentence here. Now that I'm reviewing with you, it sticks out to me. So we'll check that there. And number 3, in the last rakat in all 5 prayers, not absolutely, rather during days of widespread disaster, like famine or invasion. So our brothers and sisters in Gaza, for example, and other places, they can be doing dua al-Qunut in all their prayers right now. Because the two sheikhs reported that the Prophet ﷺ did Qunut for a month against the killers of his companions, those reciters, his companions who were the reciters who were ambushed and killed at the well of Ma'una. The Prophet was making dua against their killers for a month in Qunut, in every prayer. The evidence of doing this for other than an enemy is legal comparison. Qiyas, meaning, what did we just say here? Widespread disaster, like famine or invasion. So invasion means for an enemy. But famine, according to the hadith we just cited, the Prophet did it against an enemy. So how about a famine? What's the proof to do this dua for some disaster like a famine? Legal comparison means the scholars compared this to that and gave them the same judgment. The scholars were silent about which wording this kunut should be. This kunut for this, the kunut for the widespread disaster. Which wording, which formula should you use? The scholars were silent about which formula should be done in this case. Should it be the same formula we've been talking about all this time, or it's open? The scholars are silent about which wording it should be. That's why we don't have right here under this paragraph, we're not saying do that dua or do this dua. The silence of the scholars about which wording for kunut, for the widespread disaster, should be used gives the impression that, for them not to say anything, it gives the impression that it's the formula we've been talking about. Meaning, because this is the known one. This is the standard. This is standard dua al-Qunut. So for the scholars, when they talked about this case, to be silent, which dua goes here, it gives the impression that it should be the standard one. However, Ibn Hajar said a nice statement in Badlul Ma'un. He said, what seems to be the case is that the scholars left this matter to the discretion of the one who's praying, to say the formula that to say a formula under his discretion. Thus, he supplicates in the spot of disaster with an appropriate supplication. So I think that's clear. The scholars have differed about this being sanctioned for an outbreak of the plague. So for a famine, yes. For an invasion, yes. For the likes of what happened to those companions who were ambushed and killed, yes. What about an outbreak of the plague? Plague, which is many times worse than COVID. COVID's not the plague. The scholars differed about this being sanctioned for an outbreak of the plague. By comparison to an invasion of blasphemers, it is most likely also recommended to do it for an outbreak of the plague. Despite that, death by the plague is a form of martyrdom. And it is sunnah to lift one's hands when making dua al-Qunut. To lift your hands and have your palms facing the sky, but not to wipe the face. When you're done, tabarakta wa ta'alayt, you're done the dua of Qunut, don't wipe your face. It's not sunnah. It's not confirmed from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as Al-Bayhaqi said. And it is sunnah to say Alhamdulillah and to pray for the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam because of the authentic report about doing so, and to pray for his family. By comparison to the last tashahhud, because in the last tashahhud, after you do the last tashahhud, you pray for the Prophet and pray for his family. So then, comparing this to that, it's recommended to pray for the Prophet and pray for his family, amongst other proofs for both of those. And the Imam supplicates aloud for audible and silent prayers. The Imam supplicates aloud for audible and silent prayers. Not the follower or the loner. The follower does not do dua al-Qunut aloud, And the loner does not do dua al-qunut aloud for silent prayers, saying haqq or ashhad between its sentences invalidates the prayer. Meaning, someone's making this dua, the imam, for example, and you're the follower listening. So the imam says, Allahumma hdina fi man hadayt. You can say Ameen, but don't say haqq. And don't say ashhad. Wa'afina fi man afayt. Haqq or ashhad. So saying that between the sentences invalidates the prayer. Wallahu ta'ala a'lam. Allah knows best. Do you have any question I can answer for you?
Sheikh,
Yes.
so just to understand with Dua al-Qunut, those three occasions that were mentioned there, aside from that, in Fajr regularly, if you were to leave it out, do you still have to perform the prostration of forgetfulness?
You should. It's recommended to do prostration of forgetfulness, not obligatory. Yeah.
It's okay. You said you should. Okay.
Yeah, you should. Not you don't. Not you have to. You should. Meaning it's recommended.
And that is just one prostration.
That's two prostrations
For the salam.
before the salam. Yes.
Barakallahu fiqh.
Ameen wafiq. Whether you left it out on purpose or forgetfully. He said, what is exactly meant by, despite the fact that the plague? Yeah. Here's the statement. So the scholars have differed about this being sanctioned for an outbreak of the plague, because that's a very horrible thing, right? Outbreak of the plague is going to be a widespread disaster. So, okay, here's a widespread disaster. Should we then do dua al-qunut and all the 5 prayers, just like if there were famine or if there were an invasion? So some said, yes, you should do it. But then there's a question. Wait a minute. Should we do that? Isn't it the case that if you died by the plague, that you die as a martyr? Which is, yani, as far as death is concerned, that means you're going to be safe in the afterlife. Yeah, even though. Despite that you can achieve a high status by dying this way, still, do dua al-qunut for an outbreak of the plague because it's a widespread disaster. That's the meaning. So I hope that's good for you, inshallah. Yani, that's a nice detailed lesson about dua al-qunut there, but we're on level 3, so the point is to be detailed.
Sheikh?
Yes.
Can one replace the dua al-Qunut with another dua?
Yes. Here we said right here. Or even a supplication not narrated from the Prophet. Here. What is accurate is that it is valid by even one verse containing supplication or even a supplication not narrated from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam with the intention of qunut. So you could come up from ruku' and then you say Rabbana atina fi dunya hasana, for example, with the intention of qunut.
Okay. Barakallahu fiqh.
Ameen wa fiqh.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
Shaykh, am I hearing correctly that you said if the person is making the Fajr prayer and they're doing it in silent, they don't say the Qunut out aloud?
No. We're saying if a person is doing a silent prayer, because Fajr prayer is not a silent prayer.
Okay.
Yeah, and if he was praying Fajr silently, then he's right there not doing the Sunnah anyway.
Mm-hmm.
We're not talking about that.
And what did you say about the person who's the loner, the person who's praying alone?
The one who's praying alone, if he's praying a silent prayer, then he doesn't do Dua al-Qunut aloud.
Okay. Barakallahu.
Ameen wa fikum.
And Sheikh, just a question on you said if you are leading, then the recitation changes slightly.
Yes.
What part changes again, please?
Yeah, here. Allahumma hdini. Yani, you say Allahumma hdina. Or here, I don't know if you're looking at the English or the Arabic. Allahumma hdina instead of Allahumma hdini. Wa'afina instead of wa'afini. Watawallana instead of tawallani. Wabarik lana instead of wabarik li. Waqina instead of waqini. There, that's it.
So when you do that change, what does it change the meaning to then? Just wondering.
Instead of me, us.
Us, okay.
Allahumma hdini, oh Allah, guide me. Allahumma hdina, oh Allah, guide us, etc. Because he's leading the prayers, so he's including everyone in the dua.
Sheikh Ra'id, can I ask you, for the last half of Ramadan, is it for every prayer?
No, witr prayer.
Just witr prayer?
Yes, here, number 2, in witr, in the second half of Ramadan.
And the witr, so that's the last rak'ah?
Yes.
And in the nazila, when like there's, like you said, invasion and
Yeah,
stuff
widespread disaster. Disaster is nazila.
Yeah. So, and that is that for every prayer?
Yes, and it says in the last rakat, in all 5 prayers. Yes.
Barakallahu feek.
Ameen wa fikum.
Sheikh,
Yes.
I'm following from the sister's question. Witr is by itself, it is only one rakah, right?
Witr is 1 rakah, yes.
Because she said the last rakah. That's why.
Yeah, yani, in
After,
the last rakah.
After the sunnah of Isha, she meant like that.
Yeah, after whatever introductory rakats, after any introductory rakats to witr, then when one finally is going to do that 1 rakat of witr, then that's in the last half of Ramadan, then he's going to do the dua there, inside there.
Yes, it is the last one. Yeah.
Yes. Ameen wa fikum. That's what's meant by the last one.
Yeah.
Subhanaka Allahumma wa bihamdik. أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك